Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Tyler Calvaruso. We hope you're coming off a great holiday weekend, and we have a lot to talk about when it comes to Penn State recruiting. We'll talk Penn State spring practice with our second episode this week. We are expecting another look at this team on the field, so a lot of coverage coming your way from those observations at Lions247.com. And, of course, we'll do our best to bring some highlights here to the podcast with episode number 2 this week. First things first, though, Penn State's 2027 recruiting class. Remember how we spent months saying, when's this thing going to actually start under Matt Campbell? Well, suddenly there are 5 players on board that class, 3 more that we have to get to here since we last spoke on the podcast. We broke down the commitment of South Florida cornerback Samaje Robinson early last week. We also spoke in depth about Zachary Gleason, talking about how his commitment might be imminent. That did indeed happen, and plenty of coverage on that over at Lions247.com as Pittsburgh Central Catholic's Zachary Gleason follows Samaje Robinson as a cornerback commitment in the class. There was a third cornerback commitment we're going to get to in Karan Caesar out of New Jersey, and then Carter Blattner, former Michigan lineman, future Michigan lineman, now a future Nittany Lions lineman, and then Landon Bloom, wide receiver from Iowa. The staff had some familiarity with a top 24/7 prospect at a priority position, also on board. We're going to work our way through those 3 new additions. We're also going to talk about some of the impact that recent campus visits made on other key targets, as there's a lot of potential for Penn State to keep momentum rolling in the right directions. First things first, though, Tyler Calvaruso, let's get you back on board. We hope to have you on campus later this week if things aren't going too crazy in the recruiting world, and let you back in onto the practice field with us and get some content up at Lions247.com. But you've been very busy as the Nittany Lions have rapidly expanded things. Remember, just last Monday, we were talking about the first commitment. Now 4 more tacked on, including 3 since we last spoke on this podcast.
Yeah, first hot streak of the Matt Campbell era. If you're a Penn State fan, you got to be pretty excited after months of dormancy, where I think some people were starting to get a little bit worried about the way things were going. Even if we preached positivity and patience throughout that time period, people started to get a little restless, but restless no more. It's a quality group coming together early in the cycle. Still a lot of work to do, but the early returns, given the group that is currently committed, I'd say it's pretty positive. I think it's a pretty good way to start off the class. And with so many top targets continuing to visit campus, a bunch of top targets on campus over the weekend, this coming weekend, there's going to be more. This staff is doing a good job of not only getting their top guys to town, but doing a really good job of recruiting them while they are on campus. So a lot of things going the right way for Penn State on the trail right now, and there's a lot to get into with that in mind.
Let's do that. And again, if you missed our first episode last week, which dropped on Tuesday, we spent a lot of time talking about those first couple of commitments at the cornerback position. Samaje Robinson from South Florida, Zachary Gleason Jr. from Pittsburgh. We're going to shift focus forward now to another cornerback who came on board last Wednesday, and that is Karan Caesar from Winslow Township High School in South Jersey, a guy that is playing for a former Nittany Lion there in Atco, New Jersey, and will be playing for the Nittany Lions in college. That's his plan. Another victory for Terry Smith on the recruiting trail. Another guy that when you look at the recruiting rating right now and you see the 3-star, you may scratch your head and wonder, is this a fit for the Nittany Lions new era? Let's start with why Penn State's current staff saw a fit in the New Jersey standout.
No, Caesar's a really good athlete. That was something that Terry Smith centered on in August when he offered Caesar as part of the previous staff's pursuit. I'm not sure it really got anywhere, just given the nature of the timeline with things in the previous staff and the firing of James Franklin and all that. But when this new staff got in place, Caesar remained a priority target for Terry Smith. You know, his offer was reaffirmed by running backs coach Savon Huggins when he was recruiting in New Jersey during the January contact period. From that point on, the emphasis was getting Caesar back on campus. Did that in January for a junior day visit. Did it again last week for a spring practice visit, and that spring practice visit ultimately helped Penn State seal the deal. You know, Caesar felt really at home with the Nittany Lions around the new staff. He's been uberly confident in Terry Smith's developmental ability and his plan for him for a long time, and it's really just fallen into place even more for him since Penn State first offered during the summer, late in the summer before the beginning of his junior season, which was his first at Winslow. So this is going to be 2 cycles in a row where Penn State goes to Winslow, gets a cornerback commit. Obviously, Julian Peterson did not sign with the Nittany Lions following James Franklin's firing. He wound up at North Carolina, but Caesar, with some more stability at Penn State, looks like he is going to wind up suiting up for the Nittany Lions at the next level. It's a quality get for, I think, a couple different reasons. One, I mentioned the athleticism that Caesar brings to the table. Good ball skills, really fluid in coverage. He could do different things for you in your defense as well. He could play on the outside. He could play in the nickel down around the line of scrimmage. So versatility, athleticism, quickness, still room for growth. That's something that's obviously accounted for in each of these takes because you want to make sure you're getting a kid who still has some developing to do, some room to take his game to the next level, not someone who has reached his floor early in his development. And that's what Karan Caesar falls into that category of a guy who is already a really solid player and still has a lot of room for growth working with Terry Smith.
We've got Caesar at 5'11", 170 pounds. We also have him listed as an athlete at 247 Sports. Now, this guy has about 20 or so scholarship offers from the college level. I'm curious to pick your brain a bit here. We know Penn State sees his future in the cornerback room with Terry Smith. Is this a guy who generated interest at a variety of positions as a college prospect?
Not really, mostly in the secondary at corner. It's just a matter of where he would play at some of these programs. At corner, is he going to be primarily a nickel guy? Is he going to move around between the outside and the inside? So conversations like that. Caesar could also help on special teams. He's punt return, kick return at Winslow. So that's an aspect of his game that I think could help him see the field early at Penn State because, there's always return job competitions going on in spring camp and fall camp. That's just the nature of the beast. And Caesar is very good, very adept at making plays with the ball in his hands. You could see that on his junior season film. But no, primarily the conversation centered around Karan Caesar as a corner. I think early in his high school career, I kind of wondered what he was going to be. I remember when he was at Pennsgrove High in South Jersey before he transferred to Winslow. I think there were some people that thought, man, maybe he could be a running back. Maybe he could be a receiver at the next level given his really just overall athleticism and quickness, dynamic with the ball in his hands. But as time went on, as the film continued to circulate, it became clear that he was going to be a cornerback at the next level. That was the best projection for him. And that's how he's pursued by Penn State and these other programs that were in the mix. Virginia Tech, Syracuse, schools like that.
You mentioned Julian Peterson not ending up in this class, and a lot of those guys, pretty much most of them, did not end up in the class who were committed for much of last year. But this is back-to-back classes where Penn State goes and gets a really talented player from the secondary at Winslow Township. And Bill Belton is their head coach, and I think a lot of our listeners and viewers are going to be very familiar with that name, a former Nittany Lions running back. He's also somebody that had a lot of success as a player for Winslow Township as an all-state quarterback. When you look at what he's done as a coach, he has championship pedigree now there in New Jersey, but he also perennially is producing power conference level prospects. Many of them have gotten offers from Penn State. Not all of them have ended up committing to Penn State. I'd imagine there are more in that pipeline. What could you tell us, a former New Jersey guy yourself? I know you have moved across the border like I have into Pennsylvania, but what can you tell us about the significance of a guy who clearly has a good relationship with his alma mater in Penn State and Bill Belton and his role in maybe helping them secure some recruiting wins, not just right now, but also maybe looking forward as the next classes continue to develop for Winslow Township?
It's definitely a benefit, even with this new staff, because he's known Savon Huggins for a really long time. Obviously, he's known Terry Smith for a long time. He's known Nas Oliver in the recruiting department for a long time. So having that relationship in place in South Jersey, and look, it's huge because this staff wants to recruit New Jersey hard, and they've been doing that throughout the 2027 cycle. We've seen that be a tangible thing, not just, words that have been thrown out there. They have prioritized the Garden State, and Bill Belton has one of the best public school programs in New Jersey. He has an abundance of talent on a yearly basis. Some of that talent falls in the FCS ranks. Some of that talent falls in the group of 5 ranks, and he's had himself a handful of Power 5, Power 4 guys as well. And that's what Karan Caesar is. It's definitely a benefit. And knowing Bill Belton, knowing the way he works, he does a great job of coaching these kids and guiding them through their recruiting process. He doesn't steer kids towards Penn State just because he's a Penn State alum and loves the school. He lets these kids play things out, do what is truly best for them. He has had a bunch of success stories at Winslow. And look, I know he's thrilled that some of his guys are heading to Penn State. And Karan Caesar is he projects as one of those success stories. I mean, you really like the upside here if you're Penn State. I think he's got a chance to rise in the rankings moving forward, maybe a little bit. I'm not sure he enters that 4-star territory, but I think he's got a chance to climb with a pretty solid senior season. I think a lot of people are going to be more eyes on Karan Caesar moving forward. I think he's got a really good chance to piece together a strong senior season of film at Winslow, playing against some pretty good competition. I'm also interested to see how active he is on the camp circuit throughout the spring, because if he tests, I think there's a chance that those numbers that he posts can help him rise in the rankings. I think he has the potential to test really well if that's the route he chooses to go.
He's got some good numbers in the track and field circuit, and that probably translates onto the turf, I'd imagine. When you look at this cornerback trio now, Caesar out of New Jersey, Gleason out of Pennsylvania, Robinson out of Florida. I mean, there was a 5-month span where Penn State didn't pick up a single 2027 class commitment. In 5 days, they got 3 cornerbacks under Terry Smith's roof for the future in that cornerback group. What would you kind of collectively describe with that group, and how much more room is there to grow at cornerback? Who are some of the names that we need to monitor moving forward?
Well, Terry Smith definitely has the trust of Matt Campbell, similar to the fashion he had the trust of James Franklin. A lot these people in the building inside of Lesh, they know exactly what Terry Smith is capable of, and that's why he's been able to recruit the way that he has for this new staff throughout the 2027 cycle, early in the 2027 cycle. It's a solid trio right now. There's still room for one more. Heck, I mean, maybe even 2 more if Penn State decides that the route it wants to go. 5 sounds like a lot at cornerback, but again, when you factor in some of the versatility of these guys, maybe it becomes a possibility. 4 is more of the number that I have circled in that regard, and that's where Keyshawn Telfair comes into play out of Ohio. He's a top 24/7 prospect we've had circled for a while. The crystal ball is on Penn State, and he's moved his visit up. He's going to be back on campus this weekend with his family. It was originally going to be April 17th through the 18th. That's what he was targeting. He's going to do the 10th through the 11th now. The family's making it to campus with him for this visit because Telfair was on campus for spring practice last week, but it was just him. And I believe his uncle or someone, there was a family member there, but it wasn't the family. There's going to be more out there with Keyshawn Telfair this weekend. And look, I think there's every chance that he secures his spot among this cornerback class while he's on campus, because it's not just him on the board. There are guys like Dylan McGee, a 4-star prospect out of Texas, who was on campus over the weekend. He had a really good visit, but he's still planning on taking his spring practice visits before June 12th through the 14th official visit with Penn State. So we'll see where things go with guys like that. Roman Combs from Ohio, Trey Hopkins, who's an in-state prospect, cornerback target. Hopkins is interesting in the sense that he could play safety. I'm very much looking forward to learning more about positionally, could he really slot in at safety if the door was to open for him at Penn State. We'll see. But when it comes to cornerback recruiting specifically, got Keyshawn Telfair slotted for that 4th spot among Terry Smith's haul. And would it surprise me if this comes together sooner rather than later with Telfair getting back to campus in just a few days? No, it would not.
Yeah. Tyler, we're going to talk about that cornerback group more down the line, but we'll actually focus on other positions because Penn State is adding more talent, other prospects, and we've given Terry Smith a lot of love, and deservedly so. But let's move over to wide receiver, where we've been waiting to see how a new era will kind of shape that room. And Matt Campbell was very forthright early on in some of those initial press conferences about their desire to kind of reset that room, reset the receiver brand for Penn State. They're very confident in what they were able to accomplish at Iowa State, even with the former Cyclones receivers coach Noah Polley moving on to the NFL a couple months ago. They really like what they have in the building in terms of coaching, teaching, and some of the pickups that they brought over from the transfer portal, some of the homegrown talent that they're looking to cultivate more under Kashif Moore, who came out from Colorado State after a few years at UConn and is now here in Happy Valley. Landon Bloom is a guy from Iowa, and that automatically that you're going to have some familiarity there with the staff that was residing in Ames, Iowa for the last several years. Big frame, 6'4", 200 pounds is what we have him listed at 247 Sports. A top 24/7 recruit countrywide, #1 player in the state of Iowa. That's in our rankings. That's in the national composite rankings. How did they get this one done with Bloom, and how much groundwork did this staff already maybe have laid by the time they even got to Happy Valley?
I wasn't anticipating a commitment from Bloom over the weekend. I think there are people in the building who weren't anticipating this commitment and caught them by surprise to a degree, because the feeling was some ground had to be made up. They replaced Noah Polley with Kashif Moore. Bloom had yet to meet him in person. He was a big Matt Campbell fan and knew that group that came over from Iowa State really, really well. So that helped Penn State kind of tread water with Bloom before he got to campus for the first time for that visit. And all the feedback has indicated what helped Penn State get this one across the line is that relationship with guys like Matt Campbell, Taylor Mauser, just several in the front office, Derek Hoosier, Trent Slatnow, all those guys. Bloom has known and respected these guys for a while. But Kashif Moore, wound up being, I guess, for lack of a better term, an X factor, because those two hit it off in a manner that I think, again, it sounded like there was some ground that had to be made up, and you don't know where that's going to take you. You don't know if that's going to get you back into the mix or over the top. In this instance, it got Penn State over the top and got a commitment from Bloom while he was on campus, and an outcome that the staff is thrilled with, because this kid was a top of the board target for Noah Pauly. He was a top of the board target for Kashif Moore. The pursuit carried over. Moore wound up picking it up, doing well with it, and just hitting it out of the park with Bloom while he was on campus. Bloom liked the vision that Moore and the staff have for him in this Penn State offense. And look, now that he's on board, you get a big-bodied wideout, 6'4", around 200 pounds. There's going to be an obvious jump up in competition for him because he plays 8-man football in Iowa, but we've seen plenty of 8-man guys go on to the next level and succeed. I think Bloom's going to give smaller defensive backs a little bit of a problem on the outside. One of those additions to a class where it's just in my opinion, it's the definition of solid, raises the ceiling of what you're trying to build with your roster, especially at a wide receiver position where we've talked about it time and time again. There is a need for an influx of talent, and this staff tackled that in the transfer portal. They did a good job adding in the portal. Now they're doing it in high school recruiting with an addition like Bloom, and they're far from done at receiver. It's obviously going to be a multi-receiver class, 3, maybe even 4, depending on how things play out, because there are still, a lot of top prospects on the board for this Penn State staff in the cards. We'll get into that a little bit more, but when it comes to Bloom specifically, I think this is a really nice way to start the receiver haul. Yeah, just a really solid player all around.
I was very intrigued by this pickup, which happened on Saturday of the holiday weekend, because you see that frame, 6'4", 200+ pounds, another year of high school ahead, continuing to build upon that. And the production stands out. You go look at the box score from last year, 60 catches, almost 1,100 yards, almost 18 yards per reception, 24 total touchdowns, truly one of the most prolific receivers in the Midwest and certainly in the state of Iowa. But then you turn on the highlight reel from last season, and he really uses that frame. I mean, he goes up and gets the ball. One-handed grabs are found kind of throughout his junior season highlight film. Really good ball skills. Sometimes you get a guy with a physical frame and you say that's going to translate to production down the line. He already seems to have a very good sense as a downfield weapon right now. And who knows, he could get to 6'5", 215 pounds by the time he gets to a college campus. So can you talk us through the skill set and maybe how it fits, how this staff wants to attack with its passing game?
Well, we've seen this group have success with bigger wide receivers at Iowa State. We've talked about guys like Hakeem Butler, and he's far from the only bigger wideout who succeeded in Taylor Mauser's offense at Iowa State. And look, he's a bigger kid. Some programs, early in the process saw him more as a tight end. I think as time went on, you put on Bloom's film, you see the fluidity. I don't think, he can definitely play tight end, but it's more of a hybrid kind of deal at the position. He's not going to be an inline tight end for you. He's best suited splitting out wide and catching passes, and that's what he's going to do at Penn State as a receiver. I mentioned the frame. He goes and gets it downfield. He's a jump ball kind of guy, can make plays for you in that realm, which is, let's be honest, it's something this offense really hasn't had in recent years beyond a guy like Tyler Warren. There just wasn't really that guy at the wide receiver position. So Bloom has some versatility to his game. I think as time goes on, as he continues his development, he's got to grow his route tree, continue to get a little bit stronger in the upper body. But these are all things that I would say are natural points to critique given where Landon Bloom is coming from, playing 8-man football in Iowa. Like I said, it's going to be a jump up, but it's a jump that he's prepared to make. It's a jump up that Penn State is prepared to nurture him through, because this is another player where they like the upside. They think they could get a lot out of Landon Bloom in his role as an outside wide receiver. And he's a fit in the offense, feels like a fit culturally with what Matt Campbell is trying to build. I know that's something I've heard that drew Landon Bloom to this Penn State staff. Really like the direction that Campbell is building things with the culture, and adding a guy like Bloom who is so sold on that vision already. That really helps you not just on the field, but off the field as well, because you want to bring in guys who are truly bought into what you have going on. And it wasn't an easy decision for Landon Bloom to make, because leading up to his visit, I was hearing some buzz about, hey, look, does he really want to stray away from home? That's why Iowa was positioned so well. Iowa State, too, the new Iowa State staff was really in the mix. So this staff had to do a really, really good job with Landon Bloom while he was on campus to get this one done. They did that, and it's a win on and off the field, in my opinion.
Both of those power conference programs in Iowa targeted Bloom. You look at his offer sheet elsewhere: Auburn, Illinois, Kansas, Maryland, Miami, Michigan State, Minnesota, Northwestern, Ole Miss, Syracuse, Vanderbilt, Wisconsin, among other offers that he had on the table. And like we said, this is a really compelling way for Penn State to launch its 2027 receiver class. You always expect some portal movement at this position. I think you want to go add some experienced targets. That's probably going to be the case for Penn State. Chase Sowell is a senior right now, and so whatever he does for you on the field this fall after being a starter for Iowa State last year, it's the end of his college journey. You're banking on some development from a lot of second-year college players, guys who were here before the staff got here, guys the staff brought in, but this 27 recruiting class feels like a really good opportunity for them to kind of create their vision and put it on the field with young talent that you can develop over the next few years. And so what direction do you see them moving forward, Kashif Moore and this coaching staff, as they try to put this receiver class together?
So skill set wise, you're going to see a mix of guys like Bloom who are a little bit bigger, and then guys like Khalil Taylor who could do a lot of different things for you offensively. Line up out wide, play in the slot, good route runner, strong hands, elite speed. So they're coveting, I don't want to say necessarily a complete overhaul of the wide receiver room, because there are some talented pieces in that room. No doubt about it. We've talked about the Iowa State transfers in depth. We've talked about guys like Kobe Howard who have high ceilings and could really develop working with Kashif Moore. But they want to add guys who have that multifaceted skill set and can impact winning for you offensively in multiple ways. Bloom is a guy like that. Khalil Taylor is a guy like that. I mean, Deshaun Hall, who visited over. Deshaun Hall is, quite frankly, a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The bigger bodied outside receiver who is athletic and just go get it for you downfield. This is a kid who visited on Thursday, and he's got high major basketball offers. He's going to play football in college. That's the route he's going. But to kind of outline the athlete we're talking about here, high level basketball player, elite on the football field. You put on his receiver film, I mean, holy crap, that kid can play. It's easy to understand why majority of the SEC is in on him. So that's the kind of player that we're talking about here. Again, room for multiple additions in this class beyond Landon Bloom. Possibly even 3 more additions in this class beyond Landon Bloom, depending on who wants to hop on board. Khalil Taylor is very clearly that top target for Kashif Moore. I think that's been the case well before Kashif Moore rolled into town. Khalil Taylor was just going to be one of those guys that Matt Campbell was going to go all in to get, and that's what he is doing. He was back on campus over the weekend. It went well. I think Penn State has a real chance there. They've got a real chance with a guy like Deshaun Hall. They've got a real chance with a guy like Jameer Dean down in Tennessee. Isaiah Alvarez from New Jersey, who projects, I think, as a really nice inside receiver at the next level and can also line up out wide and win vertically. That's something that he does playing for Don Bosco in North Jersey. So there are a ton of names on this board that stand out as intriguing, bare minimum, to at least some degree. Some part of their skill set plays in this offense. Some part of this skill set lends credence to the notion that they can make an impact at Penn State. A guy like Bloom, he's just the start of it. But that's the kind of player that Penn State's going to be targeting moving forward. Multifaceted guys, impact winning multiple ways.
You mentioned Khalil Taylor at the receiver spot, a top 24/7 prospect. Gabe Jenkins is a top 24/7 prospect, a defensive back. And if you have followed our coverage during recent days at Lions 24/7, both of these guys getting more acclimated with the current Nittany Lions staff, getting back to campus and gaining a feel for maybe what this new era looks like, what it represents, how guys are practicing. They've both been on the record and saying, yeah, I could see myself circling back and ending up in Penn State's class. When it comes to Khalil Taylor, how serious do we need to take that? Because he is probably at the top of the list for a lot of Nittany Lions fans out there, a dynamic playmaker at a position where they have struggled in big-time matchups in recent seasons, and a guy who was once labeled a Penn State commit before he backed off that.
Oh, you got to take it very seriously. This is one that could realistically, get done for Penn State, I think, sooner rather than later as well. You know, Khalil Taylor's got an official visit with Indiana coming up. I think he's going to take that visit, and might not be too much longer that we get a decision after that. We've talked about Georgia. We've talked about Ohio State. We've talked about Colorado a little bit with Khalil Taylor. But I think this Penn State staff has done a really, really good job, not just making him feel at home, but really selling the vision in the offense and how every strength that I mentioned Khalil Taylor has, how that would work in Taylor Mauser's system. Because it's one thing to sit a kid down and say, hey, look, you could do this, this, and that for us, and that's all well and good. But you got to show them what you can do. And I think this staff has illustrated nicely to Khalil Taylor how exactly he can make an impact in the passing game and not just be an impact player, but be the kind of player that stands out at an all-conference level and gets to the NFL one day. Because, I mean, that's the kind of talent and upside this staff thinks Khalil Taylor has. And I think a lot of other coaching staffs in college football believe that as well. But I think we need to be following this one very, very closely moving forward because there's a very realistic chance that Penn State, like I said, can get this one done. It's not done. There's still conversations that are going to be had. And it sounds like that Indiana official visit is going to take place. But Penn State has pushed all the right buttons with Khalil Taylor, really for months now. I think the one thing we were monitoring during Khalil Taylor's first spring practice visit, which occurred a couple weekends ago, was how is he going to mesh with Kashif Moore? Because we knew how he was meshing with Noah Pauley. We knew that relationship was off to a good start. And we already knew that he held Matt Campbell in very high regard. So how is he going to do being around Kashif Moore for a day or two? And those two, again, Kashif Moore, I keep touching on him, just making up this ground and doing what he has to do. The early returns on him, I mean, I think they've been really, really positive. So yeah, Khalil Taylor, if you're a Penn State fan, circle his name. Remember it. Don't forget it. We're going to be talking about him a lot moving forward. We've been talking about him a lot throughout the cycle, and it might not be too much longer until there's some finality in his recruitment.
Our guy, Brian Doan, national recruiting analyst, one of the best in the industry. Story up on Taylor and where his thought process is entering this week over at Lions247.com on Monday. And a couple days ago, Tyler had a story up on Deshaun Hall, who you referenced there, coming up from Alabama, big-bodied, athletic receiver. And he bravely said that Penn State visit lived up to the hype, which is what you want to hear when a guy travels that kind of a distance to spend time on your campus. So a piece of the coverage there over at Lions247.com. Earlier, I misspoke when I was leading in. I said that Penn State got a former Michigan commit lineman on board. That might still happen, but I was getting my signals.
They got one on campus.
Yeah, they got one on campus. Tristan Dare is his name, and he's an offensive lineman. He was visiting on Saturday. This is what happens when we're learning a new target board in real time and following these commitments. But the commitment that was picked up in the trenches and the first lineman here in the 2027 class that we get to break down a bit who has committed is Carter Blattner out of Northern Highlands High School, another player from the Garden State in New Jersey. We've got him as the number 44 defensive lineman in the country for the 2027 class at 247 Sports. The National Industry Composite has him at the number 48 defensive lineman. He's a top 10 player in the state of New Jersey, had a vast collection of power conference offers, especially across the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, Big Ten territory, ACC territory, stacked a lot of scholarships on the table. He is heading to Penn State, though. He also committed on Saturday, like Bloom. So where was this one in terms of anticipating his decision during the weekend, and why was Penn State the pick for Blattner?
I don't want to say I was surprised because there was a sense that, well, I mean, we knew that Penn State was leading for Blattner going into his visit, but there was a sense that he still wanted to take some more visits. Like he had trips, Kentucky, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, programs like that. It sounded like he was still going to get out a little bit going into the visit, but as he was on campus, things played out really, really well. And as that visit went on, he met with Matt Campbell, and that ultimately led to the commitment. Just one of those situations. We see it throughout spring practice, really on a yearly basis. Some guys, they visit a school that is either at the top of their list going into that visit or high on the list going into that visit. And they just get there and they're so done with the process and they know where they want to be. And they make that call before taking those additional visits and stacking up a place like Penn State to the Kentuckys and the Georgia Techs of the world. I think that's how things went for Blattner. He knew he wanted to be in State College. This was an offer that was issued on Valentine's Day, and it immediately caught Blattner's eye. And we knew right off the bat that Penn State wanted to get him into the 2027 class. They've got him on board as a bigger defensive end right now. I'm going to be completely honest. I mean, he's 6'5", 260. I'm like trying to envision a scenario where he stays around that, and I just can't do it. I do think
when is the last time that you and I sat down and talked about a 260-pound high school junior in the context of him staying on, being an edge player at the college level? That would be a feat that I haven't seen of late, but it sounds like at the very least, they see some schematic versatility depending on what kind of front they want to load up and whether that's a 3, 4, 5-man front. He could potentially swing inside, outside, and those are valuable pieces if you can actually make that work at the next level.
I think the answer to your question is probably never, when you factor in the fact that some of the defensive ends that we would discuss with the previous coach, they were a little bit on the lighter side, a little bit more agile pass rusher. The bigger defensive end has a place in this new Penn State defense. There's no doubt about it, but Carter Blattner is also a 17-year-old, 6'5", 260. And if you look at his frame, you see him in person. I've seen him in person once. He's a really good player. That frame, he's not saying at 6'5", 260. There's a lot of room for growth on that frame. But it doesn't matter. You know, this conversation, it doesn't matter if he grows into an interior piece for Penn State because they love the kid. They're happy he's on board. Whether he sticks as a bigger D end, whether he winds up playing for Akaka Malloy as a D tackle, doesn't really matter. That's going to be something that gets figured out naturally over time, given on where his physical development takes him. They're just happy Gardner Blattner is on board as part of this class because they love the talent. They love the upside. He's just a mover of men in the trenches. He's a really strong kid. He's technically sound for where he's at in his development. Just, and again, kind of like Landon Bloom, just a solid get.
You know, what stood out to me looking through that offer sheet, there's kind of an outlier because you see all these Big Ten schools, all these ACC schools. And I know they're a Big Ten school. It's still weird to think about, but USC, all the way out in Los Angeles, offered him last summer. You know who their defensive coordinator was, right? D'Anton Lynn, who is now Penn State's defensive coordinator. And so that was pretty interesting to me when I was working my way through what offers he had. And when you look at this kid, you said you've seen him in person. Was that a camp setting? Was that a game setting? Where did you see him?
That was a camp. It was an Under Armour camp. I think it was last year. Yeah, it was last year.
Okay. And I know that you're going to be hitting the camp circuit again pretty soon, and you're going to have eyes on maybe some of these guys that we've been discussing. But what stands out about this guy beyond the frame? Because 6'5", 260 at 3/4 of the way through high school kind of tells a lot of that story. He had solid production last year, almost 50 tackles, I think 5 or 6 of them behind the line of scrimmage. Wasn't a guy that racked up 20 tackles for loss or 15 sacks on the season, but really solid film from his junior year. What do you think made him a guy that when Penn State staff came together, put together the lay of the land for their defensive tackle, defensive line, target board, why was he such a desirable piece of that puzzle?
I think as the staff sat down and evaluated throughout the January contact period going into February, because trust me, there was a lot of evaluating done inside of last as this staff shaped its boards on both sides of the ball. And I mean, that evaluating is still taking place, if we're being honest. It's a never-ending process. But as they sat down, they watched Blattner's junior season film. They got to look at the measurables and made some calls, got a feeling for who he is as a kid, how he would fit. I just think he became a really desirable player in a couple of facets. One, the versatility that you mentioned on the defensive line. Because like I said, if he does grow into a D tackle, that's a piece that they can use. Tough kid, strong kid, has the foundation that I think you want out of a defensive line recruit at this point in his development. I think that was a big selling point for Penn State. And this group, you know, Malloy, Smith, Lynn, that was a big selling point for Blattner. He's got a lot of confidence in that group. I know he has a really good relationship with Christian Smith, one that has been built since Penn State offered in the middle of February. And he just thinks this staff is the staff to develop him. So on-field fit, off-field fit, similarities to Bloom, again, in that regard. Kind of guy you want in your locker room, and Penn State is just really excited to get to work with a prospect who he's going to come in with so much raw strength and just ability. You know, sometimes these D linemen, they come in, they're very raw in certain areas, and you hope that you can mold them into something. You hope you can get them to where they want to be. I think Blattner's floor is a little bit higher than some of those guys, and he's got a decently high ceiling as well.
Yeah, 5 commitments. Penn State now number 25 in the national rankings on our network at 247 Sports when you look at the 2027 cycle. And if you've been freaked out about the numbers and how are they going to grow the class, reviewing this thing, there's only 2 teams that are over 10 commitments in this entire 2027 cycle. Oklahoma has 20 of them, which is pretty remarkable considering what I'm about to tell you. Texas A&M has 11 of them, and then nobody else has more than 10 across the entire country. College football playoff representatives, new coach bumps, all that stuff. That's just different pace nowadays to the recruiting scene. I don't know if that has to do with the transfer portal, the NIL role of everything, but Tyler, we used to see these classes balloon up a lot earlier, and it's just not happening right now. Do you have any theories on that, of why that's happening, or based on conversations you've had? Because there's usually maybe by early spring, like 4, 5, 6 teams that have, 15, 16, 20 plus, and it's just such a small group, only 2 that even are near those numbers right now.
I mean, last cycle, I think USC around this time, either like early April, early May, they had a recruiting class that consisted of like 20 plus kids, and it was ridiculous. It was the largest class in the nation by a lot for a long time. So I think it's just a year to year thing. I think some guys are more content playing things out longer than ever before. Some guys, like I said earlier, also kind of just get tired of the process and want to wrap things up. So that's why you've seen some big early classes. I'm trying to remember what this Penn State class, 2026 class was around this time last year. But obviously the situations are different. Nonetheless, some schools, I think you see instances where they're more content to allow recruitments to play out, and some press a little bit earlier in the cycle for kids. And you also see that result in these bigger early classes. But this year, there seems to be more balance. More kids are playing things out. I think camps, camps are right around the corner. Some of these kids want to get out. They want to make spring practice visits. They want to do the camp stuff before official visit season. Then they'll sit down and make a decision. Then you have guys on the other end of the spectrum, like Carter Jones, a four-star offensive lineman from Virginia, who moved up his Penn State official visit. He's going to be taking it this weekend now, as opposed to June. So, like, there are some guys who just want to be done with it. They want to go through the process, make their decision, and settle in get ready for their senior year. So each kid is different, but this cycle, there's definitely more balance than we've seen in recent years compared to, oh, wow, this class, it's only April, and they've got 15 plus kids on board. What's going on over there? There's not as much of that this year. And I think NIL plays into that as well, because, you want to take all your visits and have the conversations. And I guess in some cases, leverage where you can, so that's a part of it as well.
Yeah, it's hard to generate a bidding war if you stop after the first offer, right? So it depends on the motivation, and just taking a peek down to Blacksburg, which is where James Franklin now resides, and essentially much of the personnel office that was here with Penn State last year, they've relocated and followed James Franklin. They have 2 commits, the Hokies do, at this stage of the 2027 cycle. So not a lot of big numbers out there. Tyler, let's finish this conversation with your take on a few other visitors who spent time on campus during recent days as we work our way through that commitment conversation. You're reminded that this is a group that could grow much further and relatively fast as they continue to impress. I mentioned Tristan Dare, former Michigan lineman, commit on campus this past weekend, but he was hardly alone with that. We talked about Khalil Taylor. How about running back? This is a spot that we kind of are in an interesting spot with, because Savon Huggins comes in relatively late in the coaching carousel cycle as the new running backs coach. You see a target up in New England that he had established goes to Notre Dame, and now he's in their class. And Aiden Gibson is a name that you said was worth bringing here to the podcast. Tell us why at running back, Aiden Gibson has become a name that you're tracking.
Yeah, he's one of those top targets for Savon Huggins. I think Penn State's his leader at this point in time. He's coming off a really good visit, caught up with some people familiar with his recruitment, and he just loved being around the staff. Hit it off with Huggins as he did during the January contact period, and he and Taylor Mauser made it down to South Carolina to visit with Gibson. And it's been preached to Gibson, his versatility as a physical runner and as a pass catching back as well can play in this Penn State offense. So I've got the Nittany Lions on top in that recruitment. I'm not anticipating a decision soon or anything like that. I think he's going to continue to go through the process, but Penn State positioned itself really, really well with Aiden Gibson. When it comes to the outside competitions, you got programs like South Carolina in the mix, Rutgers, Virginia Tech. He's got official visits locked in there. Going to be back at Penn State in June. He wanted to get a good look at the program during his first multi-day visit. He did just that, and now he's excited to get back for his OV.
Gibson blew up as a sophomore in high school a couple falls ago, 1,500 yards on the ground. He's considered the number 12 running back, the number 227 overall player in our rankings at 247 Sports. 6'2", 200 plus pounds right now as a high school junior. So very much has that bell cow type back potential physically when you look at his development, and we'll keep tabs on Gibson moving forward. There were a couple other names that you wanted to get to at tight end and linebacker. You suggested this might make sense as kind of a tandem conversation. So I'm going to pass the baton over to you and tell us what we need to know about this pair.
Yeah, Cooper Terwilliger and Case Alexander, pair of top prospects from the Midwest. We've got Terwilliger coming off a multi-day visit where, I think Penn State continues to lead there. We've got crystal ball picks in for both of these guys, and I feel pretty good about where things are with those crystal ball picks. I think Terwilliger is a little bit closer than Alexander in a decision. I don't think a decision from both sooner rather than later would surprise anyone side of Lash, but I think there's a very good chance, well, not very good, but I think there's a decent chance that Alexander could make it to June, take some of his officials. It also wouldn't surprise me if he goes the other direction, because he kind of could fall into that discussion of knows where he wants to be, a little bit tired of the process, wants to wrap things up. So we'll see what happens with Alexander. Tight end recruiting is interesting because they could sign as many as 3. And to where we've known that he is a top target for Mauser going back to when they were at Iowa State, that's carried over. And Penn State's in really, really strong here right now. They've got the family on campus over the weekend. That was a big deal. It was a big talking point because in January, he didn't have his entire family with him for a junior day visit. And we knew he liked Penn State a lot coming out of that visit, but getting the family back for spring ball was important. That transpired over the weekend, and I've got Penn State pretty clearly on top right now. Notre Dame's in pretty strong as well. It's probably coming down to those two. And with Alexander, you've got Oklahoma, Texas Tech in the mix. I think Penn State has a pretty decent lead there as well. So feeling good about where things are at with those two. And when it comes to the significance of potential significance, those guys decide to hop on board. I mentioned tight end, they're going to take 3, so there's still room for movement there. I think if Alexander hops on board, you could start to see a little bit of run in linebacker recruiting, because you've got Blake Benton coming on campus this weekend. You've got Tyson Washington, who was on campus last week. I'm going to catch up with him soon. He had a really good visit, so I think you can see a run at linebacker really, really soon.
And remember, Case Alexander, the younger brother of current Nittany Lions redshirt sophomore tight end Cooper Alexander. He's also the son of a former Oklahoma player, and you mentioned Oklahoma being in the mix there, but his brother signed with Iowa State, and Matt Campbell and Taylor Mauser followed them to a new campus here, and now Case spending some time here on campus and getting a feel for that program. And when it comes to Blake Benton, who you referenced, out of Minnesota, a linebacker, you have a crystal ball pick pointing towards Penn State for him. And with Alexander and with Terwilliger at tight end, both of these guys, top 24/7 prospects, considered some of the best at their position in the country. And considering South Dakota and Oklahoma aren't exactly schools or regions that we've discussed much here on the podcast, they would be big signals of kind of this new era, new strategy, new focus, and the spotlight's going to land in some different parts of America with this staff now in place. Tyler, you've done a great job all the way through the holiday weekend with a bunch of stuff on visits. We're underway with another week of spring practice here for Penn State, which not just means on-field development, but we're also going to get a lot of recruits coming to campus once again into the weekend. Plenty of coverage coming your way at Lions247.com. Like I said, if there's a commitment, we will sort through that, and we'll get to that next episode if there's something between now and then. But the plan as of early in the week is spending some time breaking through what we observed on the practice field later this week. So episode number 2 of the Lions247 podcast during this first full week of April will be a lot of takeaways from the practice field, both sides of the ball. Young rising talent. What are we seeing as players look to step up for a new staff, and so many new faces that we're getting to know here leading up to the blue-white practice event in Beaver Stadium on April 25th. Tyler, appreciate you. Great work over at Lions247.com. Thanks for bringing us your perspective here on the podcast as well.
Thanks for having me, man. It's if you're a Penn State fan, I think it's fair to be excited about the way things are going right now. I think we're going to have some more good news sooner rather than later. So we'll be back talking recruiting soon.
Good stuff. On behalf of Tyler Calvaruso, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for watching or listening to the Lions247 podcast.